In this video, we're going to review all of the data collection tools that support our more community-based Vroom work. And by community-based, I mean anything from community events to steering committee or collaborative meetings, or really any other activities that support our Vroom work, for instance, doing a brain building basics training. So the forms in this video are going to all be in English, but they're also available in Spanish if you just scroll down the page. So the first form is our Vroom event sign-in sheet. This is totally optional. Use it if it makes life easier for you, but otherwise it's totally appropriate if you just want to estimate attendance at an event. So as you can see, this sheet, it asks for the names and the different age groups of the people attending, any other adults, and this is aligned with our reporting expectations on the portal. So for every community event, for all of our committee member meetings, for any other activities, we'll want to know how many people are there and how many children of these different age breakdowns. But if you're there and you can just count and eyeball it and estimate, and that that's good enough for you to be able to report from, that's perfectly acceptable that you just do that and not use this sign-in sheet. However, sometimes it might be really helpful to use this. An example of when you might want to use this is if you're trying to facilitate a lot at a community event, you do not have the time to keep track of all the people coming and going, and so just putting out a few sign-in sheets might make life easier for you. Another reason would be perhaps if you offered playgroup families an incentive if they show up at a community event, and so you would want to know specifically which families showed up. So that would be another reason why it would be helpful for you to use this form, but it's really at your discretion and meant to be helpful for you. However, if you do choose to use this form, then because it has names on it, that's personally identifiable information. And so because it has that private information, you'll want to keep this original for your records, but you're going to want to keep it private and secured. And later on in this training, we articulate what we mean by private and secured and what you can do to keep it private. But other than keeping for your own records, you're never going to need to send a picture of this to myself, Nicole Smith. So it would just be keep it for yourself, use it if it makes sense, and it might make it a little bit easier to do your weekly reporting on the portal. So that is the Vroom event sign-in sheet. Our next form is our steering committee pledge and sign-up sheet. So what this piece of paper does is it articulates a few statements about shared objectives, vision, and really the heart of what these groups are doing. And it also is used to collect some contact information about steering committee members. Now, we know that our steering committees or our collaboratives, they go by a bunch of different names. They might be a steering group, a steering committee, a collaborative, a subcommittee, a working group. They go by a lot of names, and that's perfectly fine. But this form is provided to you in a Word doc version so that you can edit the wording here to really fit what the people in your group identify themselves as. And so they don't go, well, I'm in a collaborative, I'm not in a steering committee, and get confused. So this form would be used anytime someone new joins your steering committees or collaboratives. But then also we ask that once a year, you recollect this from all of your active committee members. It's a really nice way to reaffirm an understanding of shared objectives and what you're all working towards, and also make sure that you have the most up-to-date contact information. So again, this is going to have personally identifiable information. So you're going to want to keep this for your own records, keep it private and secured. You're never going to be asked to provide this form to myself, but I or your program specialist once or twice a year might ask for your committee members' email addresses. So that's another reason why having this collected once a year and making sure that your contact info is updated will be really helpful. So that is our steering committee pledge and sign-up sheet. So this one is required, unlike the previous form that was optional. And you will keep this for your own records, but not send it to myself. Now the next is our photo media release consent form. And even though it has the word consent in it, it's not to be confused with our program consent form, which is really necessary for enrolling in playgroups. And this is for really anyone that comes to a community event, an activity, a steering committee member, a meeting, anything like that, and you want to take their photos. So you're not going to ask this to be filled out by every person that comes to a community event. But if you're going to take their photo and their faces are in that photo, that makes that photo personally identifiable information. And then also, we just need to ask consent to have that photo or that video and to use it. So that's what this form is asking. It's asking that Save the Children be able to have those photos, those records, and use them. And this is one form filled out for an entire family, not one per person or one per child. These forms should only be filled out by adults or by caregivers of children. So these forms should never be filled out by children themselves. So if you want to take a photo of a child and their caregiver, their legal guardian isn't there to be able to give consent, I would hold off until you're certain you have consent to do that. And just because you have this form filled out, you know, if you had it filled out last week and then next week you see them again, it's always good just to ask if you can take photos or videos each time anyway. They might have provided consent before, but that doesn't mean they want their photo taken today. And then vice versa, just asking for permission verbally doesn't replace the need for this form to be filled out and on file. But again, that's only if you're going to be taking photos, videos, even using the artwork of adults or children that are at your community events, your committee meetings, or any other Vroom activities. So I will not need a copy of the forms that you collect, but you'll want to check with your program specialist. They might want copies of all of their forms. And again, this has personally identifiable information. You'll keep it for your own records, keep it private and secured. And I also want to note here at the bottom, this form asks for a slightly different way of signing it if you have to read this form to someone. So maybe, you know, an adult has their hands full with little kiddos and they're not going to be able to easily pick up a piece of paper and read it. And so you want to read it to them. Maybe you have a sense some adults have literacy challenges. It's always nice to offer to read it to people regardless of reason. It's a best practice to use across the board. But this form specifically, if you choose to do that, it asks for it to be documented in a slightly different way here down at the bottom. So this is our photo media release consent form. It's required if you take photos, video, use any media from people, but otherwise, if you're not collecting that information, then this isn't required. So that's our photo media release consent form. And then this is a screen cap of an Excel-based tool. Now, some people love Excel, some people don't. So this is really optional. It's meant to be helpful if you find this sort of thing helpful, and if not, then you don't ever need to look at this again. So this Excel has 3 tabs. What you're looking at is a screen cap of the first tab, and it aligns perfectly with the portal where you're weekly going to report on any of your community events, activities. Here you can also see play groups. So if you want, you can fill in information about the date, the type. These have drop downs that perfectly align with the drop downs on the portal. These objectives perfectly align with what's on the portal. And so if you're doing a lot in a week and you know you're not going to get to reporting for a while and it's going to be hard to keep track of all of the comings and goings, you can just fill this in and then use it to copy and paste onto the portal. So that might be a reason why it would be helpful. But if that isn't helpful for you, then you don't need to use this. And this is the first tab. The second tab, very similar. It's got tabs around our steering committee meetings and members. So information collected in our pledge and sign-up sheet would be stored here. And then you could track attendance to see who's really an active participant in your steering committee or collaborative. And then the last tab is around partnerships and really any other odds and ends that support all the work you're doing for community engagement in Vroom, but might not be something that would be reported on the portal. So maybe you run into someone in the community, you make contact with them, you've got their information, and you think it's really promising. It might lead up to Brain Building Basics training. It might lead to a community event, but it isn't that yet. But you want to keep track of all of these people and all these opportunities for your own records. This is a tab that would allow you to do that. So that is the third tab of the Vroom Ambassador Tracker, but the entire Excel is just optional and just meant to help you. And it's all perfectly aligned with the portal, so you would be able to copy and paste a lot of this information. So that concludes all of our data collection tools that we use in a more community-based Vroom work.